Welcome, everybody. Good morning from the United States. Good afternoon in South Africa. Today we have with us Professor Ndlovu. He's going to talk about public history in South Africa. He has a presentation that I will manage to show you, and then we can open for questions. But let me introduce our special guest today. Professor Ndlovu is a professor of history at the University of South Africa and executive director of the South African Democracy Education Trust. He has an MA in history from the University of Natal, Pietermaritzburg, and a PhD in history from the University of the Witwatersrand. His book publications include the Soweto Uprisings, Counter Memories of June 1976, King Dingane Senzangakhona, the second monarch of the Zulu kingdom, co-author of the Thabo, Mbeki, I Know, also co-author of Public History and Culture in South Africa, Memorialisation and Liberation Heritage Sites in Johannesburg and the Township Space, and he is co-editor-in-chief of The Road of Democracy in South Africa, a multi-volume series. He's author of The Union of South Africa and the Soviet Union, Fractured Solidarity Between the African Nationalist Movement, the Trade Union Movement, the Communist International, and the Communist Party of South Africa. We have also with us today Hamish Macmillan, who's going to be streaming the event via a platform called Twitch. And I am Jimena Perry, your host for the Explorers. Welcome everybody to this event of the Explorers. And Professor Ndlovu, would you like me to share the screen, to share your presentation?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Can everybody see the presentation of Professor Ndlovu?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great. So, Professor, the floor is yours.
Yes, colleagues, my presentation is entitled Death and Detention in Apartheid South Africa, Commemorations, Remembrance, and Making Sense of Isivivane and the Wall of Names at Freedom Park National Heritage Site. So, what we have here in this image are two monuments that, in terms of public history, are oppositional. They are both built in Pretoria, which is the capital town of South Africa, or capital city of South Africa. On the left, you can see the Voortrekker Monument, and most of you have traveled to Europe, specifically to Germany. They can see that it is more or less a magnificent building, which is Germanic in terms of architecture. Okay. On your right, you have the Freedom Park Museum and Heritage Site. These structures, in terms of public history, represents the history of our country. The one on the left, the Voortrekker Monument, represents white South Africa. It was built early during the 20th century in celebration of our incarceration as Black people, celebrating the fact that as white people, they are the rulers of South Africa. And what you could tell when you go to that museum or monument, the panels themselves described Africans in derogatory terms as third-class citizens. And it was about celebrating a victory of the white Afrikaners, which supposedly took place on the 16th of December, 1838, referring to it as the Battle of Blood River. But I think my colleague, when she was introducing me, she did mention one of my publications about the second monarch of the Zulu kingdom, that is King Dingane. The war was between King Dingane and the white settlers in South Africa. But the interpretation differs between AmaZulu and the Afrikaners. And King Dingane was King Shaka's brother. Actually, he took the mantle after King Shaka. On the right, the Freedom Park Museum and Heritage Site and Monument was built in post-apartheid South Africa. That is in 1994. After 1994, after democracy came into place in South Africa. But in terms of its representation, it is an anti-racist symbolic representation of those people who fought against racism and racial subjugation and oppression in South Africa. It represents the symbol of a non-racial democratic South Africa. And it is not a coincidence that both monuments, in terms of public history and in terms of the space and the spaces each occupy, it's the same space. They're separated by a fence and a road. You can actually take a drive from one monument to the other. But the irony is now, when it comes in terms of commemorative events on the 16th of December, which is a national public holiday in South Africa, which is called the Day of Reconciliation. Reconciliation doesn't necessarily take place in a democratic South Africa. White South Africans who still believe that as white, they are superior to all of us who are not necessarily white, usually attend events, commemorative events at the Voortrekker Monument. And those who believe in human rights and social justice, anti-racism, usually go to the other side, which is the same country, the same public holiday, but different commemorations. So in a sense, it is really interesting as a scholar and historian, if you do go and attend both public events. And I must say that this is not necessarily the only time and the only place in the country that this happens. There are similar sort of events taking place, but far away. That is about more than 500 kilometers away in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, where the actual battle took place in 1838. They are more or less similar structures, but they are not this. These are grand, huge monuments, grand structures, but compared to those in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, these are huge. But what I will do today, I will certainly discuss really what are the contradictions in terms of what I deem as the public history, which makes up the Freedom Fund, the Freedom Park, which tries really to be accommodative to all South Africans. Can we go down? Can we go down the slide itself to show the next image? And this itself, I will come back to you and explain to you, which is, it's called Vivane, which is really about intangible heritage, and it is about a spiritual side of what defines South Africans, and it is based on pre-colonial history, and it is really about declaring to the public out there that for Africans themselves, a museum doesn't have to be a rectangular building, 4 walls, built according to specifics of Western architecture. For Africans, those who really believe in their ancestors and spirits, a museum is represented by such structures, who is supposed to be commemorated here and celebrated here. Those are the people who gave their lives in terms of the struggle for national liberation in South Africa and in any other parts of the world. Those who died for freedom. And in this respect, it doesn't matter whether they are white or black, whether they are European or whether they are American. But if they were part and parcel of the anti-apartheid and anti-racism movement which supported the struggle for national liberation in South Africa, they are acknowledged here in terms of intangible heritage and in terms of the spirit, wherever they are. They don't have to be in South Africa themselves. But as I said, I'm sure you're all familiar with the fact that in terms of the Cold War, in terms of the politics of the Cold War, the American government supported our oppressors, that is, the white minority regime, which was in charge of South Africa. But the people themselves in America, as part of the worldwide anti-apartheid movement, supported the oppressed and did try their best in terms of giving necessary support in various forms and standing up against the government of the United States, which supported the racist state in South Africa. So when this place was conceptualized, it also accommodated those who in various parts of the world, including the African diaspora itself, who really sided with the oppressed majority in South Africa, who were being ruled by the white minority. But can we go down to the next slide? And this map represents a different concept, which I will explain, which is about the deaths and detentions that the South African government was so desperate in the sense that that's why international solidarity was crucial because people will easily lose their lives for standing up for their rights. They will be detained for protesting against what they perceived as an unjust system. But they will be killed whilst in detention. They will die. They will be killed by the state that is in charge, that is in power, without even going through the normal procedures in terms of the legal system and the courts. So when you see 54 Transvaal, that's a province. And then in South Africa was divided into 4 provinces. So 54 were killed by the state whilst in detention. Natal was another province, was 10. Orange Free State was another province, it's 5. And then Cape of Good Hope, 41. Now we have more than 4 provinces. We have about 9 provinces. In red, it's the names of all of those who died during that time. Can we move on to the next slide? This then at Freedom Park is the wall of names. This wall of names include the names of all those who died whilst fighting for the struggle for national liberation in South Africa. But now the contradiction is that even the enemy is included here. Why? It's done in the name of social cohesion in post-1994 South Africa. It is about to be inclusive and also the South African Defence Force members are included here. And most members of the South African Defence Force were fighting against the liberation movement guerrillas, but in the names of nation building, the post-1994 government, which happened to be ruled by those who represented the majority of oppressed people, namely Africans, decided that, let bygones be bygones and be inclusive. And also, we have South Africans who passed away during the First and the Second World War, because South Africa did contribute to both of those wars. And the are also included here in this wall of names. And also, you have the South African War, or what we know as the Anglo-Boer War, which took place during the late 19th century and early. It was more or less akin to the War of Independence in America, because in the South African War, white Afrikaners were fighting against the British colonizers. But even after the war itself, they decided to gang up and form the Union of South Africa in 1910, representing the minority white South Africans, and excluded the majority made up of Africans. But all those who passed away during that war, the South African War, are included here, are part of the wall of names. So for people themselves who have lost their kith and kin as part of the death in detention, it is inconceivable for them, to see that the names of their beloved ones, of family members and community members, are displayed, in a wall of names, which include members of the South African Defence Force and members of those people who use to subjugate and oppress them. They are being mentioned side by side in a similar space, in a similar commemoration space. So these are the contradictions that we have. And when the public goes and pay visits to such commemorative events on December 16, as I said, there is usually an outcry in terms of very heated debates, in terms of was it a constructive way, to really remember the past. But the issue is here at stake, as I've said, is one, social cohesion and nation building after more than 350 years of oppression and of being colonized, and only really getting freedom and democracy in 1994. But some of our colleagues and the members of the public will really argue that, it's too early for us to be inclusive because we are not necessarily free, in the sense that what we attained in 1994 was political freedom. When it comes to economic freedom, we are not necessarily free as the majority of the people. So rather than spend time and being accommodative, we should carry on the fight in order to attain economic independence from those who have really made it a point that they have amassed the wealth of the country because they were in charge, because in terms of land issues, they are not resolved. Land disposition was the order of the day during colonial times and right up until, but you find such a public structure belonging to the people, built by the government, taking a stance that we are going to take a policy position that we are inclusive. We are a unitary state. So we will cater for all the people in the country through such structures, through such commemorative events. So that is why I'm saying that it is interesting when you find that on December 16, which is a public holiday and a day of reconciliation, if you go to the side of the fence, that is the Freedom Park, this will be the language that it's spoken. But if you go to the other side of the fence, the Voortrekker Monument, what is celebrated there, what is commemorated there, it is whiteness, and the loss of power by white South Africans who will never accept that they will be ruled by Africans. And this is happening in the same country. So other people will argue that in terms of public history, why can't we then demolish all those structures which represent those groups of people? We should just demolish them, even statues themselves. As I've said when we began, this sounds familiar to you as Americans, in terms of that battle in the public space. But as you know, in such debates, you have different viewpoints, you have different sides, because others will argue that if you do that, you are doing away with our history, painful as it is. We want those symbols to remain in the public space so that we should not forget to remember as you know, as Americans, that debate has its own history. And similarly, this is happening in South Africa. And can we move to the next slide? Here in this picture is the former South African President Thabo Mbeki on the left. He is the president who succeeded Nelson Mandela in 1999. And he was instrumental in terms of building the Freedom Park together with former President, and who is late now, President Mandela, who said that, it is important for us as South Africans to have a structure which belongs to the public. And actually, it is President Mandela who proposed the name of Freedom Park, who said like-minded people who more or less were like him should have a space and a venue and as members of the public where they can go and celebrate themselves. But what is happening here at Freedom Park at Isivivane, both President Thabo Mbeki and Mongane Wale, who was the Chief Executive Officer at Freedom Park, are sort of conducting a ceremony. And here, the ceremony itself is linked to intangible heritage, and it has to do with ancestors and all those who passed away and all those during the struggle for national liberation, not necessarily in the 20th century, because the struggle for national liberation began on the first day of contact between white and black South Africans when they arrived from the Netherlands. There was a battle for resources from the first day of encounter. So this is not limited to the 20th century up until 1994. This goes back up until then. But the issue is, the people are asking here, that in terms of celebrating that, using, intangible heritage and in culture, are you then accommodating in this sacred space? Because this is a sacred space. You can actually see that the president himself is just wearing socks. He is taking his shoes off for a specific reason, and because it also has to do with the issue of death management. So his question is, those members of the South African Defence Force who were fighting against the military wing of the African National Congress and other liberation movement involving skirmishes, involving killing people in Southern African countries, whether in Angola, in Mozambique, or Lesotho or Botswana. Do you accept their spirits in such a sacred space that is really safeguarded by ancestors who are meaning well? Because for Africans themselves, those who died in detention died a horrible death. So it means that there should be, in terms of death management, there should be cleansing ceremonies in order to accept their spirits in the African world. But those cleansing ceremonies cannot be done in the actual jails and the prisons themselves, and the prisons where they met their fate, because in terms of, the spiritual world and African cosmology, that world, those places, those spaces are not necessarily clean. Therefore, rituals have to be carried out in terms of them to be accepted at places such as Isfahan. Even if now that is not enough, now you have the members of the enemy force being part and parcel of your world at the same precinct, at the same place. Do you have to call their names here? No. People argue that, in terms of that space as a public space for South Africa. No, you don't have to. It's enough to have them at the wall of names, which is part of a structure at the same Freedom Park. But this is now a sacred space at Freedom Park. You don't want people who have committed atrocities being accepted here. So I will presume that the ceremony here conducted by the president himself and Dr. Sirot might not necessarily have been inclusive, but I'm not sure. I cannot say that. But because of the issues I've raised, there are people who believed in African cosmology will argue that those spirits are not of those who were killing. They are oppressed people are not accommodated here, because the cleansing ceremonies and death management of those spirits, it's quite an extensive ritual which is carried out in public as part of public history, and it's quite complicated, so it might not accommodate evil doers. So it's quite complicated. Can we move to the next slide? This one is the number of people and their names and the reasons given why, as the cause of their death. But this is not clear. Can we move down? There's a list where where their names are clear. This is another part. Can you move down again? Can you move down again? Yes, this list here. I think the most famous person whom the audience might know here, who died in detention, is Steve Bantu Biko, died in 1977. But if you look at the list here, if you look at number 1, Bellington map, the date of death, it's 1963. Official explanation of death, cause undisclosed. The second one is look smart, as Ndlovu. When did he die? On the 5th of September, 1963. What is the cause of death? Suicide by hanging. The state argued that when they went into his cell, they found him dead. He hanged himself. The third person who died in 1964, it is the same reason. And then the 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth one also died in September 1964. We were told that he fell out of the window of a 7th floor building, which happened to be a police station. He just decided to fly. So as you can tell, the reasons, if you look down, suicide by hanging, natural causes, pneumonia, suicide, thrombosis, fell down a flight of stairs, and suffocation, fell out of the 10th floor window, heart or respiratory failure. That is, the police could not make it a point that people who were detained for their political beliefs could leave the prison safe, rather than, go to the court and attend, to let members of the public attend their trial. These people who died in detention didn't have that chance to attend their trials. So that's, people are represented, all these names, at the Wall of Names, and all these people are celebrated at the ECV Vane, and which I said to you, it's a public space where rituals and ceremonies, which are more spiritual, are commemorated. I think I'll end my presentation here. But if you do come and visit South Africa, to come to Pretoria and visit both sides the same day, on the same day.
I will stop sharing now,
yes,
so I can see the audience. Professor, thank you very much. 2 members of the audience had to leave, but they wanted me to tell you that they enjoyed the presentation very much and are looking forward to the video. So I don't know if any of you, of the people who are here, have a question for Professor Ndlovu, or a comment or something.
Yes, they can also search the web and visit both sides that we were discussing today and find out more about what was our event about.
Oh, there's a question that I'm going to read for you. What do you see the role of your work within what you have discussed? It comes from Hamish McLean from Australia.
This is a very interesting question, really, colleague. Remember, our history was not taught. It was about the history of white South Africans celebrating how they subjugated us. So even public history in South Africa, all the symbols and statues and everything else, and the museums themselves that were there represented whiteness. So now my task now is to really unearth the other side, because post-1994, you had structures such as Freedom Park coming out into the public to say that, we do have a history that goes back to pre-colonial time. So it will be people like us who are part and parcel of the teams that are analyzing the events, will propose that, the concept itself of a museum is different, not necessarily a rectangular building. What you saw in Sivivan, that the spiritual world and the cosmological world itself and death management, sort of theories that date back to pre-colonial time are part and parcel of our public history. We have to understand those, even though they are now crafted in African languages, but we have to make them accessible to people around the world. Whilst I do know that there's nothing unique, we do share some, commonalities with the Aborigines, with the American Indians, in terms of the way we view this world. So my job is to make it a point that, one, we don't demolish what was oppressive. Should be there as part of the landscape, because the landscape which they occupy, is quite important for us, because it tells our history as a divided nation. So, but now it's not more or less adding on that. We're not adding anything rather than demolish. We should have space and time to excavate the past, because that history was banned, and if you go out in public and recite that history, you'll go to jail, you'll be detained, you will die. So post 1994, we have to find a way of telling that history, which has been suppressed. So that's my task.
You have another question, Professor. Let me read it for you. It comes from David Dean. Yes, thanks so much for a stimulating talk. I was very struck by this extraordinary heritage park. Would you say that it carries elements of sacredness?
Yes, to some extent it does, but as I said, now the debate is, it might not necessarily be that, because you have people argue, members of the public, that because you have accepted evil spirits as part of your narrative to loom large against, the place is no longer sacred. You should have excluded them. It should have been an exclusive sacred space. So now we're finding ourselves in those debates, which are really similar to the issues about the statues, in terms of a confederation, and because these ones are confederates, they should be killed, metaphorically. So we have both the statues of the old white masters, in South African Parliament or whatever. They also should be, they should just be packed off somewhere out of the public sight. But some of us say, no, that's not necessarily the case. So that's the debate. Some will argue that no, it's not. It's been trampled upon. The place has been trampled upon by those evil spirits. So sacredness is questionable now. We should have been exclusive. But in terms of nation building, said no. So that's the answer. Yeah, Professor, the book, you have the cover of the book. You can share with colleagues if they want copies. I will show, because my talk is part of one of the chapters in that book, but not even one. I do have more than one chapters. I think now that I realize I've taken from other chapters too from the book, because the sort of my arguments are more or less multifaceted. So I decided to combine them into a single talk, and that's it. Okay, thank you, colleagues, for the opportunity.
I have a question too. And
you're welcome. I have all the time. I have all the time in the world. I'm not in a hurry.
Yes, Professor, you mentioned something that I'm really interested in. It's the relationship between intangible heritage and memory. I have read like several takes on the subject, but I would like you to elaborate in South Africa how that relationship is being constructed. If you can tell us more about how in South Africa, in the work you do, you are using intangible heritage and relating it with memory.
We're moving in a complex space. We are a country which has about 11 or 12 official languages. The majority of those languages are African, and those issues are expressed in those languages. The problem now is now taking along our white counterparts with us because they are simply illiterate when it comes to African languages, you know. So as we try and do this, we are mindful of the fact that we're not necessarily doing this in order to impress them. We have to take into cognizance that in terms of these different ethnic groups, we have different interpretations of the same thing, So before you even have to think about your white, comrades or contemporaries, you have to negotiate the space within our different interpretations as from various ethnic backgrounds. So which is not an easy space, but there is a common ground that exists. So in most cases, we work towards in finding that common ground, which is defined by our different philosophies. But most of those philosophies are held by the concept of Ubuntu, which sort of about a collective wisdom, that you are a person because of other people. So the world of individualism is not necessarily part of that sacred space. So we spend our time then in terms of pushing, intangible heritage, trying to sort out the fact that we are united in diversity, rather than trying to force everyone to speak a common language. So it's so diverse that it's going to take time for us to be able to make the necessary inroad. It's like a long road to freedom. It's like the economic freedom that we're still searching for, but we are doing it. As I used this case study today, that it is there. And I saw one of the colleagues was asking a question about the book itself. And I think in the slide that you show, the last slide is the book itself. It's the book cover itself. But because you have the slide, I will send you the book cover itself with the details, and then you will distribute it to the colleagues who attended. Yes. Yeah, we distribute. As I said, for me, numbers didn't count because one thing leads to another. And then down the years, the books and the ideas will be taken further, will be developed further, and then that's it. So I'll send it to you as soon as we say bye-bye to each other. Okay.
Thank you, Professor. Okay. Just to answer to David's question about the book, I was able to find the former book about memorialization and public history. I could send you a copy of that, but of the new one, The Struggle Continues, I wasn't able to. So I think Professor Ndlovu is going to give us details on that one, and how are we going to be able to find that one precisely.
That's good of you in the sense that you are reminding me of the former book, of the first book. yeah, which is readily available in the US. So I'll send that book cover also, because I'm sure the colleagues were not even aware of the first book, but I can tell you, you are reminding me, and I know that you need to read the books together from the first to the second. So thank you for that. I'll send you both book covers so that you distribute them to colleagues, and then they
Thank
get
you.
in, etc.
Thank you,
Okay.
Professor.
Thank
Can
you.
I ask you a last question?
No, you're welcome.
In the former book, you talked, that I read a little bit about it, you talked about the relationship also with public history with tourism, and how that's a debate that's going on. And you talked about dark tourism, and I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about that, like related also to public history and the structures you were showing at the beginning.
Can I make this fascinating for you and the audience? You said you were going to engage Dr. Hlongwane after some time, after a month or 2 or 3 months. Can you ask him to do exactly that for the audience? And I'm sure that the audience then would have read the first book, and then they will have interesting questions for him. And I do know that's quite an interesting question. And as we are aware from the book itself, that space, it's international. It is international. It's not parochial. It's not about South Africans themselves, as you saw. They're about tourists from all over the world, from all corners of the world. So can you imagine, with the past that we have, the different pasts that we have, the challenge you have, which part do you want to show to tourists? Do you want to show them the famous valleys, mountains of flowers, or these prisons wherein people were killed? And my colleague will be happy to present on that. So I challenge you on that he owes us a presentation about that. Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if Hamish, Maria, or David have another question or a comment. And I don't know, Professor, if you would also have like a final remark or a comment.
I don't have a final remark or a comment. I leave that for my colleague, Dr. Hlongwane, because this is part 1 of the presentation. So the second part is coming, and it will be based on the first book.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to stop recording now.